All right. Good evening. We are in Ruth chapter 4, finishing up tonight. And I should have kept my phone because I had an email that just fit right with what I wanted to start with. But don't you love the sales pitches you get now, emails, even text messages? They come in the mail, or you get the phone call and they're saying, well, you're the lucky one, or you qualify, you've been chosen. All it is, of course, is just a sales pitch to try and get you to buy whatever it is they're pitching. And of course, you're not necessarily the lucky one if you do take it. But as I said, we're in Ruth, last chapter. Ruth, of course, is a Moabite. She's not an Israelite. And her husband, she married Mahlon, who was the son of Elimelech and Naomi. And somewhere maybe before she married, or right after she married, her mother-in-law, Naomi, her husband, Elimelech, died. And then, like I say, she gets married. Her brother-in-law, Chilion, marries. And then both her husband and brother-in-law die. And so that leaves Naomi and her two daughter-in-laws there in Moab. Now, the reason that they came to Moab was because, well, there wasn't anything growing back in Judah. And so they heard the land was pretty good there in Moab. Well, Naomi, their mother-in-law, says, yeah, there's no reason for her to stay there. So she's going to go back to Judah. They hear everything's pretty good back there. She tells her daughter-in-law to go back home. I can't provide for you. Well, Oprah does go back home, but Ruth says, nope, where you go, I'm going. Where you die, I'm dying. Your God's my God. I'm not leaving you. And so they go back to Judah. Well, they're either going to starve to death, or one of them had to go out and to glean, which is where they go to where they're harvesting the fields, and they leave some of the grain behind, especially for the widows. So Ruth, she goes out, she gleans, she comes back with a pretty good amount. And Naomi says, where'd you glean? She says, well, the field I went to, the guy said I need to come back there every single day and to just drink from their water cups and everything else. And she says, well, what's his name? Boaz. So Naomi's face gets real big, because when she came back, she says, I'm empty. I left full, but now I'm empty. She says, he's a kinsman. He's, in fact, a close kin. He can redeem us. Naomi tells Ruth everything she needs to do to get Boaz to redeem, which means marry, buy the land of Elimelech. And she does it. And Boaz agrees that he will marry Ruth. He will redeem the land of Elimelech and take care of Ruth and Naomi, which leads us there to chapter 4, because he says, I'm not the next of kin. And he makes a promise. I'm going to go to this next of kin, and I'll ask him. And he had to give a good sales pitch to this next of kin, because, this next of kin could have been a bad guy. He could have abused Ruth. He could have not taken care of Naomi. And so he had to give a good sales pitch so he could marry Ruth and take care of Naomi. So what we're going to look at in chapter 4 is the conversation between Boaz and this next of kin, or who would have been the next of kin to Elimelech, as he was the closest one, and so Boaz can redeem the land and Ruth. So first we see in the conversation, chapter 4, verse 1, he says, well, you're the closest relative. That's how Boaz informs. He says, now Boaz went up to the gate, sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. She said, hey, turn aside, friends, sit down. So he did. Then Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the city, and he said to them, sit here. They're going to be the witnesses of this, that somebody is going to take and redeem the land and marry Ruth. And then he said to the closest relative, Naomi, who's come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. Now, he's called brother, but from everything I've read, it's doubtful they were brother, as in by blood, more of like, well, really the word can be translated kin or relative. And so it's kind of like we might call, Jesse's my brother, David's my brother. In Christ, they're saying my Jewish brother is the way it would have worked. Not same parents, but they were kin, close kin. Belong to our brother Amalek, and verse 4 says, so I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those who are sitting here, before the elders of my people. If you redeem it, then redeem it. But if not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I'm after you. And next to kin says, I'll redeem it. Sounds like he's put in too good of a sales pitch, doesn't it? Well, I know I've repeated this, but I'm going to do it again. The Redeemer is a part of the Mosaic law to where they would redeem a widow or be the kinsman redeemer, because there's nobody to carry on the family name. In this case, Amalek and Mahlon, nobody carry on their name, or especially Amalek. Nobody carry on the family. It was extremely important. And so the law was, next to kin took the widow as his firstborn, would carry on the family name of the deceased husband. Now, there's a couple places in Scripture. Of course, Ruth is the best known for an example of the kinsman redeemer. But there's another one that is back in Genesis chapter 38 that has to do with Jacob, or Israel's son, Judah. Judah has 3 boys, Onan, and Shelah, or Shelah. And he gets a wife for the oldest, Tamar. But was evil, and so God took his life. So what does Judah do? He gives Tamar to his second son, Onan. Problem is, Onan didn't want to have a child by Tamar to carry on his brother's name. A little sibling rivalry, maybe a large sibling rivalry. And so he's evil, and then God takes his life, and Judah tells Tamar, you go back home, because he's a little worried, if I say she's a black widow type, where everybody she marries dies. At least that was the impression that Judah kind of has, and says, you go back home, because Shelah's too young. When he's old enough, I'll give him to you. But that shows you the kinsman redeemer, how one marries, no children. Second is to marry, still no children, goes to the on down the line. If he did not have a third son, then they could have gone to first cousins until somebody would have taken Tamar as their wife and had a child by them. So the closest kin says, I'll marry her. But he's going to change his mind in verses 5 through 8 and says, I can't do that. You go right ahead. You see in verse 5, Boaz said to him, he's made his pitch, he's agreed to buy the land. And Boaz says, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up a name of the deceased on his inheritance. So then the closest relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself. I jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself, so that you may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it. So then they do what is, as it says, now this is the custom in the times, that time during Israel, to where the closest kin took his sandal off and he gave it to Boaz. Now the understanding is, because everybody wore sandals, is he's saying the one who has the right is telling him, you have the right to walk on the land. Sandal, to walk on the land. And so he's there, as I'll point out in a minute, all these witnesses are there to witness that he's passing it on to Boaz. So verse 8, the closest relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, and removed his sandal, and he handed it to Boaz. Now, here's the part I've never found out. Does he give the sandal back? Or is the other guy got to walk around? I don't know that answer, but it sure is something that's been in my mind. Anyway, but why didn't he? He says he's going to marry, he'll redeem the land, But when he's told he also has to marry Ruth, he changes his mind. He flips on a dime. Why? Two possible reasons. One, if he has to have a child by Ruth, then it could upset the inheritance of any other children that he would have, because, they would get this and he would get that, and what if this land did good and this land did? So he might have had a fairly legitimate reason, but the reason that I think is because Ruth was a Moabitess, not an Israelite. And this is during the time of the judges. Joshua's let them in, Joshua's gone, and Israel doesn't have a king, doesn't have a leader like Moses or Joshua, and so different people, because the nation of Israel doesn't quite follow God the way they should. And so Moab may have at this point, I know at one point they do, they come in and they rule all or a portion of Israel until they cry out to God, and God raises up a judge that removes their oppressor. And the Philistines did, the Moabite did, this one did, that one did. And so maybe he had a bad taste in his mouth against the Moabites. Or it could have just been he was a racist and didn't want to be around anybody that was not an Israelite. So racism's been around a very long time. So we don't know exactly why, but I would say it's because if you read the text, it's Ruth the Moabitess. Boom. Nope, I can't do it. And so that's probably at least part, if not the only reason why he says, no, I can't do it. You go right ahead. Boaz has no problem with it. He knew who she was. Knew all or most of about her. So then we see where the witnesses come into play, and you are the witnesses. He says in verse 9, Boaz says to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses today. I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I've acquired, I don't like that word, I wish it would say I'm going to marry, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife, in order to raise up a name, of the deceased on his inheritance, so that the name of the deceased may not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. And you are all witnesses here today. So he spells out exactly what he's going to do. Yes, I'm going to buy the land, but I'm going to marry Ruth, and I'm going to give the firstborn is going to carry on the name of Elimelech and Mahlon. And then it says, all the people who were in the court, all the elders said, we are witnesses. So today, if you go to purchase land, you sign until you get cramps in your fingers from all the papers that you got signed. Usually there's only one person that witnesses. Well, Boaz didn't have to sign any papers. But he had all these witnesses that if somebody said, hey, what are you doing farming that land? Well, I purchased it from such and such to have the right. Prove it. Well, let's go to the elders. And the elders would sit usually, or this is where, as you see, towards the gate of the city, they would all congregate. Wise men of the city, elders of the city. And so instead of having a paper to say, see, I've got the right, he said, just go talk to the elders. I've got witnesses. In fact, he had 10 witnesses of it. And so this is what, they are witnesses, you're witnesses. And so then we see where you're blessed. You are blessed, or the blessings take place. Verse number 13. So Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. He went in her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive. She gave birth to a son. So Ruth is blessed. She has a child. She has a son. Then verse 14. Then the women, you remember when Naomi came back from Moab, the women said, oh, it's Naomi, the pleasant one, because her name means pleasant. And Naomi was not pleasant. She said, call me Mara. I'm bitter. Well, now these same women evidently say, Naomi, blessed is the Lord who has left you not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name be famous in all of Israel. Naomi didn't have a child. Ruth had the child. But that child is redeeming Naomi's husband's name. And so in a sense, it is her son. It's the same. If you go back to Abraham, God tells Abraham and Sarah, you're going to have a child. Years go by, no child. Sarah says, well, you know the custom is you can have a child with my maid and it will be my child. Same difference. Naomi has a child, so to speak, because Ruth did. And Naomi took the child, verse 16, laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. Like I said, she didn't give birth to him, but she now has a namesake. You can think of it that way. So Ruth's blessed, Naomi's blessed, and we're blessed. Because if you look at the last part, beginning halfway through verse 17, it says, they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Yes, King David. And then the last part says these are, and as I said, lineage is very important to Israel. And so that's how Ruth closes out, with lineage. These are the generations of Perez, who was a son of Judah. To Perez was born Hezron, Hezron Ram, Ram Abinadab, Abinadab Nahshon, Nahshon Salmon, Salmon Boaz, to Boaz Obed, Obed Jesse, and Jesse David. So Boaz and Ruth are the great grandparents of King David. If Ruth had stayed back in Moab, we would not have had King David. If Boaz had said, no, I'm not going to redeem, we would not have had King David. But what's even more important, and where the blessing comes for us, is when you go to Matthew chapter 1, and beginning at verse 6, we've seen from Perez, which is the son of Judah, who's the son of Jacob, who's the son of Isaac, who's the son of Abraham. Matthew puts all those in there, and then we see Matthew 1, verse 6, Jesse's the father of David, the king, the man after God's own heart. David was the father of Solomon. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam. Rehoboam, Abijah. Abijah, Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat, Joram. Joram, Uzziah. Uzziah was Jotham. Jotham, Ahaz. Ahaz, Hezekiah. Hezekiah, Manasseh. Manasseh, Amnon. Josiah became the father of Jeconiah. Y'all can correct me later in my pronunciations. And his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. After the deportation of Babylon, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel. Shealtiel, Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel, Abihud. Abihud, Elkim. Elkim was Azar. Azar, Zadok. Zadok, Achim. Achim, the father of Eliud. Eliud was the father of Eliezer. Eliezer, Matham. Matham was the father of Jacob. And in verse 16, Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, by whom Jesus was born. Notice it doesn't say Jacob was the father of Jesus. Matthew put that in there intentionally to show there's a difference about Jesus. Joseph married Mary, who gave birth to Jesus. And so what do we get from Jesus? He's our Redeemer. It all fell in line from Ruth and Boaz all the way down. It's a part of God's plan. It's how He wanted it so that we could be redeemed just like Ruth and Naomi was. Now, as I said, the family heritage, it's why Matthew puts it in there. You see that Ruth ends that way. It's extremely important. Read through the Old Testament and find somebody that has first and last name. It will say Calvin, son of Wilson, or such and such, son of such and such, and sometimes they'll go back a couple. And the funny part is, it may not be the direct, because you might read like, and he's the son of Judah, the son of Abraham, because they're skipping, only hitting the high notes, so to speak, when they do that. But they will take you back and let you know who they are, not first and last name. They didn't have social security numbers. They didn't have driver's license. You were known by your name and by your father's name. And the story, as I said, the best story, or the second best, I'll put it that way, as far as the kinsman redeemer, is Judah and Tamar. He gets Tamar for his oldest, he dies, no child. He gives Tamar to his second oldest, Onan. He dies, no child. Well, my third oldest, let's wait a while. Well, he doesn't. Time goes by, Judah's wife dies. Tamar's like, he's done lied to me, and so I'm going to fix him. He hears that Judah's taking his sheep down to the shearer. She dresses like a prostitute. She goes down, finds Judah. She winks at him. He says, okay. They have relations. She conceives and gives birth to twins, one being Perez, which is in the lineage of Jesus Christ. What's Jesus known for? One of the things Jesus is known as? The Lion of Judah, because he's of the tribe of Judah. He wouldn't have been if Judah had done the right thing and Tamar didn't have to take and play the prostitute. Boaz, we see, he was an honorable man. He was a family man. He kept his word by going to the next of kin, but he also was willing to marry Ruth, to have a child by her that would continue the lineage of Amalek and Mahlon. So again, the importance of the heritage, the lineage. And that is why you see Matthew starts off that way, because Matthew's writing to Jews. And so he puts that lineage in there for them to see Jesus is a part of prophecy. He's a descendant of Abraham. He's of the tribe of Judah. And he's a descendant of King David. But Joseph wasn't his father. So that lineage is in there by Matthew for a particular purpose, to show there is a Redeemer, as promised by the prophets through Abraham and David. But today not everybody knows they need redeeming, right? Some people think, I'm good to go. It's funny, Paul and I were watching a little video. We're going to leave Sunday and head up to Lancaster, to Amish country. Love it up there. Some of the prettiest land, prettiest farms ever see. And I knew it. She said she didn't realize it, but the Amish really believe not in salvation by grace, but by works. You got to keep all their rules and regulations in order to maybe get into heaven. They could be called a modern day Pharisee because they want to obey their laws, not by grace. So you see, there's people out there today that are like it. Mormons, they call themselves Christians, but they don't follow our Christ. But again, they've got all these rules and things you got to do. Islam, you got all these rules and things you got to do. Buddhism, Hinduism, you find any other belief system, Jehovah's Witnesses, there's all these rules that have to be followed, and maybe you get to go to heaven. They don't know about the Redeemer that's already made the way so they can go into heaven. So maybe there's someone that you know that you need to have a serious conversation with about their Redeemer. They might be a relative of yours, maybe they're not. But you want them to be a relative by the blood of Christ. You want to be able to call them brother and or sister in Christ. Now, you cannot purchase their salvation. You cannot barter for their salvation. You cannot work for their salvation, and neither can thee, because Jesus has already redeemed them. They just have to accept that free gift. Jesus said, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, whoever believes. The worst person you can think of that's alive in the world today, if they accept Christ, they're redeemed. Now, in our human minds, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't seem fair. But you see, of course, to God, a mass murderer is just as guilty as somebody who stole a penny. We weigh it like it's a penny. He killed 100 people. That's not fair. But to God, it is. He created this world, and it's His rules. Put it that way. Now, for somebody, of course, to get saved, to be redeemed, they have to hear the gospel. Well, You don't have to bring them to me or to a preacher and hear the gospel. I know, David, you've handed out tracts. You can talk to somebody one-on-one. I said this a few weeks ago on Sunday morning. Write down and know your personal testimony. Don't memorize it, because I can't stand that. I'm talking to somebody, you can see the wheels turning. They're trying to, see, I say this and then I say it. Just speak from the heart. You don't have to say the entire thing. Just say what part fits or what comes to mind. So you can say, this is what happened to me. This is how I got redeemed. Because they cannot argue with your story, because it's your story. And so they have to hear that message and believe it. Romans 10:9. Confess with your mouth Jesus as Lord. Believe in your heart God raised from the dead, and you shall be what? Saved. You see, that's the part. People don't know they need saving. They think, I'm good to go. In this video, it still gets me. It was a video of a couple of Amish families who, and I did not know this.
Or the documentary series.
Well, whatever. Let's not be too picky. But the Amish have their Bible written in a form of German, and hardly any of them can read it. And they're told, don't go get an English Bible and read it. So guess what? In this documentary, a couple of those Amish guys got an English Bible and started reading it and got saved. And they had this one guy, he had the gift of evangelism up one side and down the other. He's out on the streets. You've probably seen him, what was it, $1,000 bill, $100,000 bill with the gospel track on the back. He's here, read the back. I couldn't believe it. An Amish man, and he looks Amish, he's got the dress, sharing Jesus Christ on the street signs. I'm like, wow, that was great. I'd love to. I'd love to. I'd shake his hand if nothing else. But for somebody, of course, to be redeemed, you got to confess and you got to believe. I've known people my time, they confessed it. I heard it. I can't tell what's in their heart. Only God sees the heart. Once, of course, they do, their next act needs to be an act of obedience to Christ. Coming before the church, where the congregation of the church serves as witnesses of the individual's acceptance of Christ as Lord and Savior. Just like Boaz had those 10 elders be a witness that he was purchasing the land and that he promised to take and marry Ruth. The one who believes needs to unite with the body of believers to help them grow in their faith and knowledge of Jesus Christ. And it gives them a place to work to serve the Lord, for we're known by our work. James 2:24 and 26. You see that a man is justified by works, not by faith alone. For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. As I said on Sunday, James is not saying you got to work to have faith. He's saying because you have faith, you work. There's a lot of people I've known in my time who I want to tell them this over and over, that if you've got faith, you are to work in the church, not just make sure that pew doesn't move on Sunday mornings. Because I've known people like that. They come in, they got their spot, they sit, that's all they do. No, if you got faith at any age, you should work, whether it's you're a prayer warrior for the church, you're making phone calls, checking on people, you're teaching, you're doing whatever. You should be working. Otherwise, you know what happens to churches? They die. Because there's no spirit in them. They're just there. Jesus came to earth to live and to die and to become mankind's Redeemer. Because it is the only way mankind can be redeemed. One day, every human being is going to stand before God, the ultimate judge, and God's going to pay us back for the work we did for him. Psalm 62:12, and loving kindness is yours, O Lord, for you recompense, you pay back a man according to his work. Now, if you're a teacher or work in a sawmill or a pastor, or that, he's not going to pay you back for that work. He pays you back for the work you do for him. You may not do much in the church, but you could be like this Amish guy I saw on the street. You're just handing out tracts and sharing Jesus all day long. You're doing it for the Lord. That's the work we get paid back for. Now, how are we going to get paid back? Well, I used to use this illustration about, imagine the Apostle Paul. Who greater of a Christian can you think of than the Apostle Paul? I mean, he literally put his life on the line for Jesus. And so heaven's a pretty good sized place. So I can imagine that the Apostle Paul in heaven has been paid with a chauffeur-driven Mercedes-Benz limousine to be taken around heaven anywhere he wants to go, right? And somebody like me gets up there and I'm given a skateboard with a broken wheel. Point is, we're both in heaven. We're paid for our work. But really and truthfully, we're paid to get to come before Jesus. We get to pay to where we can say, holy, 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 and just bow down before him. That's our pay. That we're in heaven before our Savior. Jesus made that available to all who will believe. He didn't have to come, but he did come. He came to die so he could be raised, to open that door to heaven and become mankind's kinsman redeemer. Because once you believe in him, you can. You become brothers and sisters in the blood of Christ, by the blood of Christ. And so we're kinfolk. And this is why and how he can redeem. So I close with, who do you know that needs redeeming? And will you tell them their ransom's already been paid? I'm telling you. Any questions? Any comments? If not,